Since 1854, progressive-minded men and women in Jackson County, Michigan, worked to develop their own libraries. Rented halls, storefronts, gas stations, and homes nurtured early libraries. Businessmen and housewives pooled books and shared knowledge. Children and students navigated crucial life changes through storytelling. The library exposed people to culture and helped the community face war and financial hardships head on. The long history of libraries in Jackson County is vast and consists of many small stories. Stories about a local champion who came home from the Civil War and over the next 40 years fought to keep his dream of shared knowledge alive. About a long-lost romance between two old friends who worked together to give Jackson the library it deserves. About a courtly woman who, when charged with starting a county library, armed herself with a typewriter, desk, and book truck to provide materials for book-hungry rural folks. About rough-handed men seeking books about Model T carburetors. Well-traveled ladies who left flowers of gratitude at the door of majesty. WPA workers who swapped stories while binding thousands of books during the Depression, and a Jackson Junior College student who juggled golf, his girlfriend, and F. Scott Fitzgerald in his muses. And then there are the stories about unsung heroes. I'm Lynn Loftus, and this film, a collaboration between Jackson District Library, the Ella Sharp Museum, and Jackson College, outlines the early history of what the current Jackson District Library Director, Ishwar Lashminarayan, calls the People's University. Settlers arrived in the Jackson area in 1829 and created a permanent settlement. Religion and literacy were strong influences, and many households owned both primer and family Bible. In 1854, young businessmen in the community formed a mutual improvement society. In its early years, the Young Men's Association, or YMA, sponsored debates, provided free public lectures, and attempted to establish a reading room. Political turmoil of the day prevented the organization from developing further. Talk of slavery, secession, and war replaced the desire for libraries, reading rooms, and books. In 1863, Colonel William H. Withington came home from the war a hero and helped revive the Young Men's Association. As Jackson prospered, attention once again returned to literary endeavors.
Article 3. The object of this society shall be the promotion of literary and scientific purposes by means of a library, reading room, literary exercise, and lectures. W. H. Withington, YMA Minutes, 1863.
The YMA Reading Room opened on March 15, 1864, and was essentially a gentleman's club. Members came to the reading room to relax, play a friendly game of chess, read periodicals from as far away as England, and smoke their cigars.
In consequence of the increase in number of those who frequent the reading room and the growing taste for reading, the board of directors determined to commence the founding of a library connected with the association. Young men and boys are asking for books they cannot afford to buy, and few of them have access to good private libraries. We hope to secure by donations from citizens from 500 to 1,000 volumes. American Citizen, November 7, 1865.
The library, which officially opened in 1865, was not a true public library because only YMA members had access to the books. Members were expected to read and distribute knowledge to the young men and boys in the community. And while women were urged to collect books for the library, they could not join the YMA. The YMA held an annual winter lecture series, which included well-known speakers such as Ralph Waldo Emerson and P.T. Barnum. The price of the series was $2 a person, $3 for a gentleman and his lady, and $4 for a gentleman and two ladies. Speakers commanded a hefty fee ranging from $25 to over $200 a night. The high cost of one particularly famous lecturer was not overlooked by the editor of the local paper.
An unusually fine audience assembled Wednesday night to hear Mark Twain's new lecture. Mark shambled out on the stage. He bowed to the audience and then stood perfectly still for about 5 minutes, as though waiting for a sufficient supply of words to commence his speech with. For this lecture, which took an hour and 15 minutes, Mr. Clemens received $125, or nearly $2 per minute. Jackson Weekly Citizen, 1871.
The men of the YMA supported the enlightened ideals of the day. A strong mind must be supported by a strong body. They decided to open a gymnasium and purchased exercise apparatus at a cost of $1,000. Almost from the beginning, problems occurred.
Mr. Latimer made a report concerning the gymnasium, sharing that there had been much misconduct. The room was frequented by unruly and noisy boys. YMA Minutes, September 15th, 1865.
After only 1 year of operation, the directors closed the room and sold the apparatus at a loss, which, coupled with the high cost of the lecture series, created financial difficulties for the YMA. To benefit the organization, a Japanese tea party was held at the new home of W.H. Withington. All 3 floors were decorated with Japanese lanterns, fans, and oriental furniture. Young Japanese women conducted authentic tea ceremonies. It was the event of the year. The benefit raised $700.
The city of Jackson increased its population over 2,000 last year, expended nearly $1 million in improvements, enlarged its manufacturing establishments, has 6 railroads, 40 passenger trains each day, is surrounded by a rich agricultural country, has low taxes, has fine schools, and is a thriving go-ahead city. The establishment of a free library would be of utmost benefit and a pride to our city. Jackson Daily Citizen, January 17th, 1882.
Jackson was thriving, literacy was on the increase, and people wanted access to books. In 1885, State Senator Michael Shoemaker, former YMA president, sponsored a law allowing cities to levy taxes to support a free public library. This allowed for the formation of a library that served all of the people.
Let this free library be once established, and every citizen will look upon it with pride. The time will not be far distant when, as a city, we may justly be proud of a library which is positively free to both the rich and the poor alike. Its influence for good could not be overestimated. Its power as an educator to the people would be unmeasurable. George Dodge, YMA President.
The most active users of the new public library were women. Many of the women belonged to women's clubs, literary clubs, or book clubs. They not only eagerly checked out books for their own enjoyment, but used the library to conduct research for the programs they presented at their club meetings.
These women's clubs come here to find help in their work, often taxing the library's usefulness and capacity to its utmost extent. Celia Waldo, Public Librarian, 1889.
Children were also frequent users of the library. Staff designed programs such as Story Hour and Magic Lantern shows to encourage reading and to familiarize children with the library.
Children flock here by the hundreds every day. Out of a circulation of 100,000 books every year, a generous third of them are charged to these little men and women. The boys and girls of today are the legislators of tomorrow. Celia Waldo, Public Librarian, 1893.
The library was quickly outgrowing its space. Industrialist Andrew Carnegie established the Carnegie Library Fund to create libraries around the country. In 1900, Jackson applied. Funding was based on population, and the city agreed to purchase the necessary land and provide annual operating funds. Carnegie generously awarded Jackson $50,000, but Jackson wanted a library like none other, and plans went over budget by $20,000. Mrs. R.H. Zellie Emerson, a member of the Jackson Library Committee, wrote Carnegie via his secretary, asking for the additional funds to build the building Jackson deserves.
Mr. Bertram, the current library is located on the second floor of a good block on a business street, about in the center of the town. There is no elevator. Its quarters are pleasant, but as it occupies the whole floor, there is no chance of expansion. The book space is cramped, and the reading room entirely too small for the growing attendance of the public, especially the children, who are there in great numbers. The reason my previous letter was not typewritten is that it is, in a way, a personal letter to Mr. Carnegie. We were old friends in Pittsburgh years ago. Will you kindly see that it meets his eye? Zellie Passavant Emerson, 1900.
They were indeed old friends. As a young girl, Zellie Passavant and Andrew Carnegie had even spoken of marriage. Her father, a well-known Lutheran minister, objected on religious grounds. Zellie took the train to New York to make her case, and in honor of their past friendship, Carnegie granted Jackson an additional $20,000.
My dear Mr. Carnegie, believe me that the people of Jackson deeply appreciate your generous gift. The library building, in its simple and serene beauty, has set a new and high ideal for public buildings in our town, and its perfect adaptation to all library needs will provide for the city a library home for a half-century to come.
The building was due to be completed in 1904, but labor unrest and construction problems increased the cost and delayed the opening by 2 years. When Zellie Emerson went for more funds, Mr. Carnegie said no. The new building finally opened on August 21st, 1906, to great fanfare.
There will be no more jibes and jeers as to when the new library will open its doors. They actually opened on Monday morning. It's safe to say Librarian Waldo was the happiest woman in Jackson. But the building is a peach, and its magnificence and convenience go far to compensate for the long delay. Hundreds of our townspeople visited the library Monday and Tuesday to inspect its beauty, and several ladies left flowers. Saturday Evening Star, August 1906.
The new public library quickly became a hub, providing services and meeting facilities for a variety of patrons. There were lectures on finances, travels, and history. Men heard about advanced farming methods, repair techniques, and how to use the latest technology. One of the most popular books was a manual explaining how to repair the Model T.
So my grandmother on my dad's side regularly attended the library to upgrade her skills and keep current with what was going on. I remember her taking us there, and she told us the whole story of how Mr. Carnegie gave us the money to build the library, and it was a place of learning, and it was a place to be revered and held high in esteem in the community.
In World War I and World War II, the library served the community as an information hub. Posted maps showed battlefronts. Books and pamphlets helped women hooverize intelligently so that meatless Tuesdays and wheatless Wednesdays should be days of joy and not of gloom. The juvenile section was enriched with Uncle Sam's Boy at War and The Adventures of Arnold Adair, American Ace. During the First World War, head librarian John Clevenger led the Victory Book Drive, which sent books to camps and to the boys over there, to take them away from the horrors of the frontline trenches and to entertain them while they were lying wounded or ill in a hospital. During World War II and the Korean conflict, the Jackson County Dad Service Club purchased up-to-date technology books honoring the young men and women who had served. The public library dedicated a room in the Carnegie Building to house these books. Jackson Junior College had a similar program honoring their students who had been lost during the war. The Jackson Public Library was also a hub for young people. Children attended musical programs, storytelling, and Library Week events in the second-floor children's room. Natalie Field remembers visiting weekly as a child to check out books.
Did you know that we had stereoscopes in the children's room? It was a very popular picture viewing device. And you put a card in which had a picture on it, only it had two pictures, one for your left eye and one for your right eye. And so when you looked through the lenses at it, it made it look three-dimensional.
And they had these wonderful story hours. So my kids they were 3 and 9 months. And so we would come over here and we would just sit down on the floor, and they had these wonderful storytellers that would just bring the books alive. And my kids would sit there enraptured for an hour.
Older students from nearby schools came to do homework and socialize. Jackson Junior College student Len Crandall writes in his 1932 diary about his girlfriend, Mary.
The note she wrote me in the library today seems to indicate that she really does like me. I wonder, shall I ask her to go study with me? I don't know.
Len was an avid reader who read up to a dozen books a month.
Worked all day, played hearts at Ben's until 11:30, and then came home and read Fitzgerald's Flappers and Philosophers. I wish I could write like that.
While the public library satisfied the quest for literature and learning for city folk, what options were available for people in rural Jackson County?
I believe we should provide residents of Jackson County outside the city of Jackson the same benefit of library facilities that are enjoyed by residents of the city. Books and papers bring the world to our door. A healthy mind needs a variety in its thought, just as much as the properly nourished body demands a varied diet. Louise Teft, Hanover, Michigan, request to county supervisors.
At the turn of the 20th century, the state library established traveling libraries, which provided rural areas with books, and became so successful that people wanted permanent libraries. Several varieties popped up in the county, from the private library that Miss Nellie Young opened in Brooklyn, to a sprinkling of subscription and free libraries in Springport, Concord, Parma, and Hanover. In 1929, Jackson was one of 2 counties in Michigan chosen to start a county library program to serve the growing population.
To get the newly established county library in operation, we need a librarian with initiative, imagination, energy, ambition, and good common sense, in addition to a library degree. Miss Constance Bemmett, Extension Librarian at the State Library.
Miss Maud Grill, teacher, newspaper reporter, librarian, was more than qualified for the task. Most importantly, Maud knew how to work with people and persevere in hard times. She was given an automobile and office space in the basement of the Carnegie Building. One of her first tasks was to learn how to drive.
The first months have been very busy ones. Starting with absolutely no books at all, about 1,800 books have been bought. 1,000 books have been lent by the Michigan State Library. These 2,800 books are now distributed to 19 stations in small-town libraries, post offices, and oil stations where shoeboxes and canned goods have been shifted to make room. At one station, the task of placing books on shelves just vacated by tomato cans was suspended to charge the books out to interested patrons. At another, the children have greedily taken out easies, and books like Peter Rabbit went out and came back 3 times a day. The county stations are reached by a very efficient Ford coupe truck. So we do feel that it is true that Michigan moves ahead. Maud Grill, 1929.
The county library started up around the same time as America's Great Depression. Both city and county libraries were affected by these hard economic times. It is a testimony to Maud Grill's tenacity that the county library program even survived. The book budget at both the public and the county libraries was severely slashed, and often only 1 or 2 copies of popular books were in circulation. Protecting and reissuing books became a priority, so both systems employed work project administration, or WPA workers, to rebind thousands of books. These workers also served as librarians, researchers, and book truck drivers. While the WPA workers made wages just above the poverty level, city librarians made even less.
Dear Miss Dowsett, we find that our present salaries are inadequate. Rent, food, and clothing have advanced in price, and we are only able to live a hand-to-mouth existence. Some members of our staff have found it necessary to work for their board. WPA workers on library projects doing unskilled labor receive more money and work 100 hours a month less than we do. Ruth Foster, on behalf of the public library staff, 1936.
It was Miss Stratton who said you should go back and get your bachelor's degree because there's no pension at a library. Non-traditional students were not very common in college. They were pretty much 18 to 20-year-olds. So for her to go back to college took a lot of courage. Miss Stratton was right there behind her. So we've always considered Miss Stratton as very important.
To meet the growing demand for books, the public library opened a branch on the east side in 1915.
The eastern branch was just a very small wooden building, as I recall. Thought it was fabulous because you didn't own too many books. You got them for Christmas and birthdays and things like that. I just remember friendly librarians and Grandma taking books home too for my mother and the rest of the family that were all readers.
During the 1930s and 40s, branches were established at the Austin Blair and Helmer schools and at local church centers, including the AME and the Calvary Methodist. The decade of the 50s was one of growth in library services. The Jackson County Library System moved to a new building on West Avenue in 1954, and both the city and county libraries instituted a neighborhood branch, or what's more commonly known as the bookmobile, to provide easy access to books.
Every other week, a large brown bus pulled into our small parking lot with the promise of a new adventure in books. Entering the bookmobile was like entering a sanctuary. I had an overwhelming feeling of panic. I wanted to choose the right book within the short time allotted to us. I thought that the librarian had the best job in the world. I assumed she drove the bus home and sat in her driveway reading books all night long. Mrs. Betsy Orison.
Lots of times while I was driving, they would, the girl that was working with me, she'd sit at a little table, kind of like desktop, right behind the driver. She'd be getting books we had loaned out or how many and getting them filed. The women, I think, they dash out from home, and come to the bookmobile.
Duplication of services and financial stresses led to talks about merging the county and public library systems over the years. In 1970, voters rejected the idea. Some feared the city would lose control to the county, but others chafed at the fact that they were being taxed by both the city and county to support the libraries. From the librarian's perspective, the budget situation was dire by this time. Lorraine Bouchard and Jack DeBall recall.
If you think back to the tone of the 70s, 60s, 70s, anytime the municipalities had financial difficulties, the first place they would cut would be the libraries. So we were always on the chopping block. Both library systems or departments had very strong library directors prior to that time, Claire Surgeon and Eudocia Stratton. Those two people were very adamant about supporting the agencies of the government that they represented, but both faced the same peril of no money when it became apparent that the only way public library service was going to survive in Jackson County was for a merger.
Joseph Warren was city manager. He called me into his office and he said, Jack, you're going to have to put a committee together, and the only way we're going to survive this is that we merge the libraries. Finally, the vote came in August, and we were successful.
That was 1977. It was no small task to find ways to unite two separate administrative systems, space, finances, collections, and two separate staffs with separate contracts. The process, led by a newly appointed Jackson District Library Board, took almost a year. And after an intense search, David Lehman was hired to head the new Jackson District Library.
And I would say that if you look at the directors that were involved in the district library, after the consolidation, David Lehman had to create a new image. He did that very well in his 10 years. Virginia Lowell brought us into the technology world. Richard Douglas, Bessie Burnett, Lauren Dickinson, they had to go out and they had to integrate themselves into the community.
The library joined the computer age in a partnership with Jackson Community College. Automation replaced the card catalog, collaboration replaced duplication of services, and technology brought the entire system up to date.
To me, it is more about the impact that the public library makes on a common citizen. The fact that residents of a community pool their resources together to create this collective good for the betterment of the community, and that even though someone may not personally use the library, they want a public library in their community because it represents the vitality of that community.
Many heroes and many stories make up these early years of libraries in Jackson County. It's time for new stories to begin. Stories of community outreach, improved facilities, changing technology. Stories of partnerships and projects. Stories of new heroes and new champions. Will you be a part of these new stories?